Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so I'll give just a little more background on myself. Again, I'm Dan Hendershott, Environmental Health Manager. Environmental health is part of the Summit County Public Health Department. We live and work every day with the building department, the planning department, because we're kind of like the regulatory branch of public health, but we're enforcing public health laws, rules, regulations. We're probably most famous for being the health inspectors, so we're inspecting all the restaurants. Even though you guys unfortunately don't have one now, we used to inspect the Green Mountain Inn back when it was open. So our second biggest program is on-site wastewater. And so on-site wastewater treatment systems or septic systems, septic tanks as some people still call them, are a great way to recycle water in more rural areas such as Heeney. But they do require land in order to be able to disperse that water. And so that's kind of why we're here. Some of these lots don't have a lot of land to produce an on-site wastewater system. So anyway, we'll get into that a little bit more, but I don't regulate or get involved with public sewer systems, but in my work with septic systems or on-site wastewater systems, we get the question a lot, and so that's kind of why we promoted this study. Again, we've got Simon Farrell and Ryan Gomez, right, with JVA Engineering here to help present. And so I'm going to start with the intro and some of the background of why we're here, and then they'll talk about the more technical pieces of what a sewer system here might look like. And then I'll get up again and kind of wrap things up. Where do we potentially go from here? The one thing I want folks to leave this meeting with a clear understanding is that the county is not pushing this issue. We were really just responding to the questions we were getting out there. And so the next steps will be up to the community on whether or not you go forward with a sewer system or continue with the on-site wastewater system treatment that we've been, working with for decades. So next slide, please. Everything going well with the Zoom, Connor? Yep. Okay, people can hear and see okay. So here's a little bit of background. Many old and undocumented on-site wastewater treatment systems in the Heeney area. And we see them failing. We're seeing about 2 or 3 a year in the Heeney area, and then we work with folks to get those systems replaced. Sometimes they require variance. Our new regulations, as of I think about 2018, allow us to do higher level treatment technology systems, and then you can reduce setbacks to wells or to surface water, wetlands. So we've seen less variances lately because people are allowed to go with a higher treatment technology that produces cleaner water to justify encroaching on some of those setbacks. But those higher treatment level systems cost money. We had a system last year that some of you are aware of that got replaced, $120,000. And so septic systems, especially of these higher level treatment technologies, are not cheap, unfortunately. So when you start to talk about what a sewer system will cost, just kind of keep that in mind. Average septic system is about $50,000, maybe $40,000. They can be less, they can be more, highly variable. But man, as you know, nothing's cheap these days, unfortunately. So very small lots. Here's a image of a lot in the Heeney area. Does it have the dimensions? Yeah, it's got some dimensions, but some lots are 50 feet wide by 100 feet long. It's about a tenth of an acre or so. A lot of them have been combined into 2 or 3 parcels. But a small lot here is about a tenth of an acre, just over. The setback from a leach field or soil treatment area, we call it, to a well is 100 feet. And so you can see the problem when a property is only 100 feet long and you're trying to get these separation distances, it becomes a real challenge. In this case, we had 63 feet to a neighbor's well and 69 feet to an on-site well. We went to the Board of Health and got a variance because they just did a higher treatment technology system to justify a lesser distance there. I don't remember what that system costs, but it's expensive. Higher technology and variances, we talked about that. Owner frequently asks us, is there a sewer system available that I can hook up to? The answer is no. The next question is, why not? I don't know why not, because there's a lot of variables. We'd have to install this and that, a treatment plant. And so I could never answer that question. Owner frequently asks us as well, oh, I just bought this house for a steal. You guys know what a steal is these days. But a lot of homes in the Heeney area are a lot less expensive than in the southern part of Summit County, but you're limited. So you've got a one-bedroom cabin. Your family's growing. You want to pop the top and make it a 2 or 3 bedroom home, and you can't. You're limited by your septic system in a lot of those cases. Next slide. So the background, environmental health requested permission to commission a study that explores the development of sewer in the Heeney area. It's just asking some of these questions that we've had over the years. So the Board of County Commissioners approved $25,000 to go towards this study. They actually approved more than that initially, but then we pursued grants. And Department of Local Affairs grant was acquired for $25,000 to help pay for this initial study. Environmental Health contracted with JVA Engineering. They've got extensive background doing these kind of studies and beyond in the actual design and construction of these types of systems. I think one of the principal engineers lives in the El Dorado Springs area. If some of you know, that's kind of down in, I'll say it, Boulder. It's kind of dangerous to use that term around here, I know. But in the south part of Boulder, where El Dorado Canyon comes out, there's a little community that's not too much bigger than Heeney, probably. And one of the principal engineers lives there and went through this whole process for that community, so a lot of experience there. So they call this a project needs assessment. It's kind of the first phase with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment process of permitting these kind of systems. They call it a project needs assessment. So JVA worked with community members, many of you in this room, the Heeney Water District, Snake River Wastewater Treatment Plant, up by Keystone, Public Works folks, which includes the engineering department, and then my department, Environmental Health. And this study was completed earlier this year. Next slide. So in our request for proposal, we identified some of the pieces some of the questions that we would like to maybe not have 100% clarity answers on, but we just want to explore some of these questions, including what a collection system might look like, treatment options, plant locations, discharge options, phases of construction, cost estimates, and then finally, what potential funding options might be. And that's one thing to consider. When you have an on-site wastewater treatment system that fails, there are no grants available to you to make those repairs. There isn't a revolving fund system. You're basically limited to paying for it with cash or like a home equity loan. We see that a lot. We also see a lot of repairs happen at a point of sale. The system's kind of been hobbling along and someone's going to buy it, and hopefully there's equity in the sale to pay for that as well. But with sewer, there are more funding opportunities, and we'll talk about that. At the risk of people interpreting this image as what you're going to potentially see in the Heeney area, I threw this in. This is nowhere near the size of what your system might look like. This is the Snake River wastewater treatment plant. Next slide. I think I'm handing it off to Ryan. Great.
All right. Hi, everyone. Again, my name's Ryan Gomez. I'm a design engineer with JVA Engineering. So to kind of dive a little bit more into the technical specifics of this report, one of the main first questions that we wanted to answer was, what would a collection system look like in this community? Knowing that there are a lot of really small streets, a lot of really small lots, it can get a little challenging to design that. And so we broke the community into 3 distinct service areas. The Heeney Water District is kind of the term for the area that's currently served by the Heeney Water District at about 109 parcels. I understand Lee's Landing is not the correct subdivision name, but Lee's Lakeshore, about 45 parcels as well, and then Willow Hills down there to the southeast at about 35 parcels. And so the reason for breaking these up is really feasibility. Heeney Water District having water service lines and having these kind of predetermined easements is a lot easier to design a collection system compared to Lee's Lakeshore and Willow Hills, where all those lots are on smaller OWTSs or wells and don't have kind of those easements already in place to be able to build a collection system. So we'll talk a little bit more about how that affects cost estimates and everything as well, but I think the main thing to think about in terms of the collection system is there's 3 phases. Heeney Water District is kind of the main collection system that would be considered part of the main project, and then the Lee's Lakeshore and the Willow Hills subdivisions are kind of considered more like adders for this project. So the main thing to point out in terms of the actual wastewater treatment facility is the proposed location as of right now is down by the Bridge and Roads building. And so you can see right here, this is kind of where we would be proposing to install that wastewater treatment facility. The treatment technology that we'll talk a little bit more further in depth can be scaled down pretty small. So as you can see, I think it's a 40 by 70 foot building, not quite as expansive as the Snake River wastewater treatment plant, but still able to keep it within that kind of smaller lot there. And that parcel, that land parcel, is owned by Summit County, which is kind of what led us to designate it as the planned around area, just understanding that Summit County would be more amenable to some sort of land trade, land acquisition, as compared to, say, the U.S. Forest Service or any other privately owned lots. So that kind of led us to deciding where we were going to put this treatment plant, right by the road and bridge maintenance building. And then from there, really the collection system, it's really a gravity game. The more that you can use gravity within your collection system, you're reducing your pumping needs, and it's just more feasible, more realistic, I'd say, as well, in terms of this topography within Heeney as well. That being said, you have to have all your flows go to a low point, and then you would have a pump station that would then pump up to this proposed wastewater treatment facility. So as of right now, I think in our report we referenced having a lift station for each of the subdivisions at kind of the low point that would be able to collect wastewater flows by gravity from those subdivisions and then pump up to the wastewater treatment plant where it would be treated and then discharged. Pretty much the thing to take away from the collection system is, regardless of the subdivision, it will be fairly difficult to install. It's going to be definitely a challenging construction project. The Heeney Water District having those water service lines proves it can be done, but it is definitely something to consider, especially also considering the shifting of the soils that is present within the Heeney community. So just something to consider in terms of the collection system, kind of broken up into 3 different subdivisions, and there are going to be challenges with installing it in each of these, but the Heeney Water District is kind of the one that was focused around for development of the actual cost estimates. And then, of course, we had adder cost estimates for the other two subdivisions. Next slide, please. So here is just kind of a map showing our wastewater collection system. We also have a larger map here on the side if you'd like to take a look at any point. Like I said, this Heeney Water District here on the left side is really the main, call it, community that would be planned around in terms of this project. Just from a, I'm okay, thank you though. Just from a feasibility standpoint. And then the Lees Lakeshore and then the Willow Hills area would be kind of considered as add-ons, whether those community members would like to, have this be included in the project. The main thing just to also point out here is these red lines, those force mains. Those are where you're pumping from your pump stations, denoted by those red dots. Those are kind of at your low points, and those would be pumping to your wastewater plant. Noting the location of those, I did want to just point out that they're not in the floodplain, and they were selected for both being at low localized points where they could collect all of those flows by gravity without being in the actual floodplain for the communities. Next slide, please. And then to kind of wrap up my portion, just wanted to give a brief overview of wastewater treatment for those who aren't as familiar. To kind of start at the beginning, you have your pump stations that are pumping your flows to an equalization tank, and that's pretty much just getting all your flows into one tank that then allows you to control how quickly you're feeding flows through your treatment system. So if it's late at night and no one's really using the sewer system, your sewer treatment plant isn't going to go dry. And same thing if it's 7 a.m., it's not going to overwhelm your treatment system. It would then go through a headworks facility, which essentially is just screening out all of those rags, feminine hygiene products, things that could get into your equipment and damage them, really trying to protect your downstream equipment from there. After that, secondary treatment is kind of the real horse of your treatment process. Simon will kind of talk about the selected treatment process here and a little bit more depth into what the secondary treatment process is, but more so just to kind of understand that this is really what's doing the bulk of your treatment for your effluent. After that, you would have tertiary treatment and kind of solids handling. Solids handling is really what it sounds like. You're removing your solids from your actual treated effluent. Depending on the application, I think within this system, it would be processed into kind of biosolids. What you think of those? I'm trying to think the actual term. Biosolids is fine, but manure that's used for land applications, things like that, you're removing all that from your actual effluent, getting the water to then be treated for discharge back into the systems. Tertiary treatment is kind of termed as like polishing. That's really where you're getting a lot more of that fine treatment for specific nutrients. So great example, if you have really high phosphorus within your water that's coming into the system, you might have a polishing or tertiary treatment technology that specifically targets phosphorus. Really, usually tertiary treatment can be kind of optional. It depends on what your water is like chemically, basically. And so it really depends on what you need to treat for and whether you actually need to treat for it to meet certain discharge limits. And then lastly, you have UV disinfection. This is really just killing all those viruses, cryptosporidium, giardia, anything that's still kind of living within the water. That's killed by UV disinfection before it's discharged into the river. So I think with that in mind, I'm going to hand it over to Simon to kind of talk a little bit more about the secondary treatment process and kind of what proposed project we have here for the Heeney community. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Next slide, please. So once again, I'm Simon Farrell with JVA. I'm a project manager. I I actually used to work for the Summit County Environmental Health Department at the beginning of my career, but I've been in consulting engineering now for the last 12 years. Do a lot of these small systems, we call decentralized. This is kind of a unique aspect within wastewater treatment to be looking at systems that are, say, from 2,000 gallons per day to 100,000 gallons per day. So for the alternatives assessment, what we looked at were three different treatment technologies. What Ryan just covered is kind of universal to these three technologies. We looked at a membrane bioreactor, an MBR, a sequencing batch reactor, an SBR, and also a fixed film algae treatment. These are not the only three options that are available, but these are pretty common for the flows you're looking at about 70,000 gallons per day. So I'm going to walk you through what those three technologies are. So starting with the membrane bioreactor, that's actually what you're seeing on the right here. That's what the report is based on. You could use the term package system for this size flows. This would be a package wastewater treatment facility. A membrane bioreactor basically just doesn't have clarification on the end of the treatment process. Instead, it has a membrane. And what that allows for is usually higher levels of tertiary treatment. It would be kind of more of an intensification of the treatment process, so it's typically a slightly smaller footprint, a little bit higher energy input, but higher water quality coming out, and also more control over that water quality because you have to pass through the membrane in order to discharge. That is what we've selected so far for this report. The reason for selecting the membrane bioreactor is due to tertiary treatment and effluent quality. You guys obviously are discharging to a pristine, Green Mountain Reservoir, and we believe the membrane bioreactor would be the most protective of water quality. We do not yet know what the water quality standards are that we need to meet to discharge. There's a process you have to go through the State Health Department in order to determine that. But the membrane bioreactor represents a very conservative approach to reaching the highest water quality. Sequencing batch reactors are another option. The way that works is kind of exactly how it's described. It's a batch reactor. So you fill it up, and then you go through a sequence of aeration and settling and decanting, and then you discharge that, and then you fill it up again. And you just keep on repeating that process. That is used for other small communities. El Dorado Springs was referenced earlier. They have a sequencing batch reactor. It doesn't have that tertiary treatment component standard. So typically, if you want to meet really low total phosphorus and really low total nitrogen numbers with a sequencing batch reactor, you have to add on to the back end of it in order to meet those limits. Whereas with a membrane bioreactor, we can do that all in one unit operation. That's why it wasn't selected for this project. We also looked at a fixed film algae treatment system. These are becoming more prevalent. We are installing one in Colorado this summer for a small camp. And we've just had communities show interest in these before because they're very energy efficient, right? You need more land. You're letting the algae do the work, but you can harvest a useful byproduct, and you can achieve quite low nutrient limits with low energy inputs. However, it is not as frequently used as a technology. It's a little bit more experiential. However, it is being used successfully in numerous locations across the U.S. We did look at this for this, but we ultimately selected an MBR just due to it being tried and true and already being used in Summit County. Effluent discharge alternatives. We looked at three different ones. Discharge to Green Mountain Reservoir, discharge to a soil treatment area, and discharge to the Blue River. So discharge to Green Mountain Reservoir is ultimately what we selected. That would be from the location where we're proposing the plant having a outfall going into Green Mountain Reservoir. Obviously, Green Mountain Reservoir changes in its water elevation quite a bit, as you can see today. So that would be a unique design for the outfall. The discharge to soil treatment area was kind of one of the first things we looked at. So this would be groundwater discharge. This would basically just be like a scaled up version of what you have at your home right now for a soil treatment area. The issue we had there is the land requirement. Back to the napkin calculations, we're looking at 8 to 9 acres in order to apply that wastewater at 70,000 gallons per day and getting 8 to 9 flat acres in this area, high cost per acre, was quite the challenge. We also looked at discharging to the Blue River. Where the plant is currently sited, that would be a very long conveyance in order to get one of those discharge locations. So it just really increased the cost quickly in order to get to that location. One thing I will add is that, these are preliminary recommendations. If this project continues, if you decide to continue to move forward, once you get preliminary effluent limits for these different locations, they can influence the cost of the overall project. So an example would be you have to meet different limits when you discharge to groundwater than if you discharge to a reservoir, than if you discharge to a certain point in the Blue River. And there's a process you have to go through in order to make that determination. And so we do find sometimes that when you go through that process, you find out that, gosh, you know what, even though it's going to cost more to discharge in this location, it's worth it because of the limits that would be required of the plant. Next slide, please. All right, so for this proposed project, Ryan covered the sewer collection system. We started with what we called the Heeney Water District area. I know there were some questions like, why did you start there? It was very high level. It's the most amount of parcels, and there's already a district. So if this is to move forward organizationally, one of the things the citizens would have to take on is either having the Heeney Water District form a wastewater district or take that on as part of their district, or forming a new district. That's not a trivial undertaking. And so we've seen that hold up a lot of projects where, like, how do you get the community organization behind forming a district and funding debt and making those hard decisions? And so since you guys are already doing that with the Heeney Water District, that seemed to be a logical place to start. That was the rationale behind that decision. There would be a single lift station at the low point pumping to the proposed location that Ryan covered earlier. And then what does that system look like? Similar to what Ryan covered, you're going to have your influent pumping station. You're going to have your headworks for screening. You're going to have we based our price based on a specific manufacturer because we were able to get a proposal for them for a package system. This is a Cloacina Mempac MBR package treatment system. That's where you'd have your secondary treatment. So you'd have aeration for secondary treatment. We would go ahead and account for phosphorus removal. We're assuming we need to meet a 0.2 milligram per liter total phosphorus. That may not mean anything to you, but in the world of wastewater treatment, that's quite a low level. A lot of raw wastewater is typically in the 7 to 9 milligram per liter, and not all treatment plants in the state of Colorado are even treating for phosphorus. A lot of ones that are treating for phosphorus are meeting like a 1 milligram per liter limit, and we're talking about meeting a 0.2 milligram per liter limit, which is more common for what you're seeing for other dischargers in Summit County discharging these types of pristine waters. UV disinfection, right? A final step to inactivate any type of bacteria that's made it through the process, and then the solids handling. We would not be doing any mechanical dewatering. The scale is not large enough to justify the cost there. You would actually have liquid hauling of solids. So that would be liquid hauled to another facility. And then ultimately, the effluent would get discharged to the Green Mountain Reservoir. Next slide. All right, project costs and funding. So for that first phase where we're just looking at the Heeney Water District area and a treatment facility, we're coming up with a capital cost of $12.2 million. That does not include the collection system for Lee's Lakeshore, an additional $1.2 million, or Willow Hills at additional $2.5 million. As we talked about, organization, that's really going to be a challenging part of this project, and really a next step is the community motivated to take something like this on, and who's going to be the champion in order to look at how you would form a district and how you would service the debt in order to make this happen. There are a lot of different ways to fund these types of projects. So if you were a district and you're going out and applying for funding, I can give you a few examples of funding packages. One is the state revolving fund. Dan mentioned this earlier. This is a very typical funding mechanism for districts throughout the state. And they offer low interest loans Right now in the range of 3 to 4%. It varies based on the bond market. They also have an arm of that is grants that would not be paid back. However, grants are prioritized for disadvantaged communities. The Department of Local Affairs has a certain way to determine a disadvantaged status. You have to have less than 80% of the state median household income. As of right now, Heeney is just above that at 82%. So there's numerous ways to make that determination, but the initial report from DOLA is showing that Heeney would not qualify as a disadvantaged community. So you wouldn't be looking at grant funds, you'd just be looking at low interest loans. I'll mention another one as well, USDA Rural Development. That is another program that commonly funds small community water and wastewater infrastructure. They do the same thing where you get a blend of loan and grant depending on the project, the severity of its impact for the community, and whether or not you're disadvantaged status. So I'll just give an example. I've worked with communities before in Northeast Colorado that were disadvantaged status. They got all of their engineering paid for a wastewater treatment facility. The federal government picked up 100% of that. And then they got a 70% grant. And then they got a 30% loan for 40 years at less than 2% interest rate. That's the best funding package I've ever seen. But that is out there. I'm not saying that's applicable for Heeney, but that's one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum would be no grants, no loans, pay for it on a cash basis, and have the tap fees and the user fees completely pay for all that. Heeney would come somewhere in the middle of those two. And how the district makes those decisions is ultimately what determines the rate structure. There's also the Department of Local Affairs. They did, planning grant helped paid to, get this meeting here today and pay for this report for you guys to start evaluating these options. They do have energy and mineral impact grants. I don't know if you're familiar with that program. Up to $1 million with a 50% match as a grant is a very common funding mechanism for wastewater projects throughout the state of Colorado. Different funding cycles, right? So that's based on a severance tax on minerals being extracted from the state of Colorado. That money gets pooled, and then districts and municipalities can apply their projects towards that pool of money. Believe that's it. Next slide. Dan, back to you.
Thanks, Simon. So the study that was produced is a public document. We currently have it available on our website for anyone to go and take a look at. We've got Brad over here filming tonight. He's going to put together a video. We'll also have that available. And so I just want to make everybody aware of that resource, because there's a lot of people here tonight that aren't here tonight that have interest in this. There's also people who are going to buy a house in 6 months that may have interest in this, and so that's where they can get this information. And of course, you can reach out to any of us and we can provide it to you as well. Next slide, please. So next steps. Where do we go from here? It's up to you. The residents will decide, like Simon said, if this is a priority for the folks in Heeney to pursue. You guys will, motivate to form a wastewater district. I'm not that familiar with how this process works, but I think it goes through our planning department and our board of commissioners and different things. And then once the district is formed, you would obtain engineering. You're thinking, well, what did we just have done, right? That was very 10,000-foot level evaluation of what a system might look like. Actual engineering would need to be done to get to the level of detail where you would be pursuing permits with the state health department. And then you would decide the phases of the project. Like Simon said, the treatment plant that was proposed includes all 3 phases, but doesn't include the collection systems. And so And the treatment plant could be scaled down if, for example, you don't see the value in including the Willow Hills area. One thing I think wasn't mentioned with the Willow Hills area being a potential phase 3 is that's where the majority of the shifting soils is over there. And you have to go quite a distance, several lift stations. So the district may decide that we're not going to build our plant for all 3 phases. We're going to build it for a phase 1 or a phase 2. And then administratively, some of those questions, I know we've got some questions to answer tonight, but would there be a tax imposed? Would there be a inclusion into the district fee? We've seen it in Upper Blue Sanitation District, which is basically everything upriver from the high school. That's all Upper Blue Sanitation District, and as they've expanded, in particular into the town of Blue River area, they gave people the opportunity to pay to include into the district, even though they're not planning to connect. The motivation was you can buy into the district at today's prices, and then in 10 years from now, when your septic system fails, you've already paid that district inclusion fee, and so then you would just pay your taps and then the construction costs. So there's a lot of decisions that the water district or the wastewater district would need to consider. And then, of course, the construction phase would occur after that. Next slide. So thank you, and again, thank you to the commissioners for helping to fund this study. And so with this, I think we're prepared to take some questions. I know that we've got about a couple dozen questions that have already been provided. And so maybe we could start by going through those questions and then open it up for questions either from the Zoom or here in person. So with that, I'll start and ask some of the questions, and then based on each question, we will kind of determine who's the best to answer. We'll probably be repeating the questions just so that we can pick up the feed on the video that we'll be producing. Have there been any tests showing wastewater pollution in Green Mountain Reservoir? Slimy green moss at inlet that didn't used to be there, possibly coming from Silverthorne plant. The answer to this is no. We don't have any tests showing wastewater pollution in Green Mountain Reservoir. If we did, this would probably be a different conversation because it would be something that would be pushed a little heavier than where we're at now, where it's voluntary. Why is the Heeney Water District community the first phase when there is a water system? It is easier for a septic to be installed compared to Lee's Lakeshore. The report incorrectly refers to as Lee's Landing. Yeah, we kind of talked about that a little bit, which is on well and septic. So what the question is getting at is what I call the downtown Heeney area versus the suburbs. This water district area has a water system, so we don't have the well to septic system setbacks that we do in Lee's Lakeshore and Willow Hills area. We do still have challenges with setbacks to water lines, though. That was a big challenge with one of them that was installed recently, was we had to dig up the water lines, encase it to meet state code on that because the septic system was within 25 feet of the water lines. But we already talked a little bit about the advantages of starting with that phase, the density being one, a district is already formed there. Discharge alternatives, you preferred alternative wastewater treatment plant site option 1 is to discharge into Green Mountain Reservoir. It looks like a pipe would have to cross Forest Service property to get to the reservoir. In other sections of the report, Forest Service land acquisition is not a viable option. I don't know if it was discussed as not a viable option, just a little more difficult option, I believe. Running a pipe through a piece of Forest Service land might be perceived as a little easier stamp of approval than putting a full wastewater treatment plant, maybe. Do y'all have anything to add to that?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
An easement versus for a pipeline as opposed to a plant that requires constant access.
Yep. Question 4, why isn't the property owned by Summit County on the south side of County Road 30, across from the proposed treatment plant, considered for discharge to soil treatment? I'd have to look at that specifically. I'm not sure if you guys looked at the size of that parcel, but the size, the amount of land that it would take to do soil discharge is huge. I think you all threw out maybe 10 acres or something potentially. It would depend on the soils and characteristics of discharge limits as discussed. And it would require more energy to pump uphill. But I'm personally not familiar with the size of that parcel. It's not off the table, something we would consider down the road. Anything to add to that?
We like the idea of discharging the soil. It's a very large area for
Yeah.
the topography we have here, so it's going to be very difficult to achieve.
And we didn't even talk about the potential of shifting soils with, such a large footprint of a soil discharge system. Where did the funding come from for this study? The fact that subdivisions are mislabeled makes one wonder about other facts and figures. I'll just ask for a little bit of grace on that. I apologize. We did identify a couple of areas that were a little inaccurate initially, but the only one I'm aware of is Lee's Lakeshore versus Lee's Landing. A little grace there, but where did the funding come from? I think we already discussed that. Half from the Board of Commissioners and half from the State Department of Local Affairs. Let's see. If this does come to be, what would be the feasibility / cost of getting water put in when the roads are opened up for sewer? Double-walled water lines, clearance requirements. Good question. Good question. Something that we'd have to answer down the road, whether or not those two could be installed at the same time. I know you guys are probably a heck of a lot closer to upgrading your water system than your wastewater system. We've already been talking about when the water lines get put in, encasing some of those water lines to respect the septic systems that are in the vicinity. And so those conversations would definitely need to be held. I forget what the water to wastewater separation distance is. I think it's 10 feet or so. Is that about right? Yeah, so that distance is a lot less than it is from a soil discharge system, which we're already in discussions on. Your engineer for the water system has that in their report. Who will pay for it, and what are the anticipated costs overall? I feel like that question has probably been answered and discussed to the ability that we can at this early phase. But that would also be a lot to be determined by the wastewater district and yourselves. Do grants have to be paid back? If yes, over what time? Grants don't have to be paid back, loans do. And Simon kind of discussed that a little bit, that loans would probably be the more realistic funding option for you all. And I think you said 30, some of them are 30-year paybacks at a 2 to 3% interest rate. So pretty low, long duration payback. When would actual construction begin, and how long would it take to complete? That's a really tough question. I don't know when, that'd be up to you guys. I don't know when. The earliest, if you guys got on the horse and just started going as fast as you could, several years, right?
Yeah, even for these package systems, like once you're at 100%.
Uh-oh, you got a mic, Simon?
Sorry. Is this good? Yeah, so just thinking out loud here, for these types of package systems, because we're dealing with this with another client, let's say you were at 100% design, you're fully permitted, you're ready to issue a purchase order for the equipment. From the time you issue that purchase order, you don't even receive it for a full year, as of right now, for these types of package systems. 6 months, there's one manufacturer that can do it in 6 months, but most of them are about a year out. So it's realistic that your active construction on the treatment system would be about a year, but you would be ordering the equipment before you would even mobilize.
Yeah. And the collection system is a whole nother question, probably, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a statement. Have you noticed the age of most of us?
I don't know how to answer that without getting in trouble. I assume that's a rhetorical question. I'm not going to answer it. Let's see. Is participation optional or mandatory? So I think we kind of discussed that a little bit. So if sewer is available to you within 400 feet of your property and your septic system fails, you have to connect to sewer. And so that would be a mandatory piece of it. But I think the question is a little deeper than that. When sewer comes in to my neighborhood and I just spent $40,000, $50,000 on my septic system, would I be mandated to abandon my septic and connect to sewer? Typically, no. That would maybe be up to the sewer district. But in my experience and Simon's experience, people connect when their septic system fails. One consideration in there would be is if you have an undocumented septic system, that's at least probably 50, 55 years old. That's pretty old, and we don't know what's there. I could see me personally supporting a homeowner to demonstrate that they at least have a functioning septic tank and leach field in place, or you would have to connect in that scenario. I think that would be kind of a middle ground that the district would need to decide on and may ask for our opinion on that. I've seen homes in Heeney where you flush the toilet and you see it come out in just a little rock hole in the ground in the backyard. We won't ask for anybody else to share what they've potentially seen, but that is not a very safe system for protecting surface or groundwater. So I'd probably support those kind of systems needing to connect.
So how many cabins have the system that you have no documentation?
So I believe
Within Heeney?
I believe our records a few years ago when I pulled some data showed about 50 permitted systems in the Heeney area. And what was it, 197 parcels in the 3 areas. So, but all of those aren't developed. I think 140 are developed. About there. Does that kind of answer your question?
Well, I mean, just within the downtown area.
Yeah.
84 cabins that are on the water, Heeney Water District.
Mm-hmm.
Out of those 84, how many do you think are on old systems that you don't have documentation?
Well, when you didn't start keeping documentation till 78 or something like that.
1973 is when we started requiring permits. And so pretty much everything built before 73, unless it's failed and been replaced, is undocumented. Usually people in like the 60s, people wanted to protect their investments. So they typically were putting in a steel 500-gallon tank and a leach field. They didn't want their system failing. So I'm not too proud to say even without government here permitting, people still did a pretty decent job. But there's a few where it just flushes out the backyard into a hole in the ground. Yeah. So I could do a little more research and get back to you on a little more detail on that. But maybe anecdotally, 1 in 4, 1 in 3 are permitted. Yeah. Who would be the system operator, county or special district, and how will the operating costs be covered? Again, a cost question I think we've discussed quite a bit, so I'll focus on the who will be the system operator. It'd be the special district. That's typically how wastewater systems are operated, not by the county. Will this result in a tax increase for the people who reside in the district, regardless of whether or not they connect? That's a great question. It'd be up to the water district. They can, as far as I understand, pass a tax to help support a wastewater district or a water district. And so that would be one funding option to help kind of relieve the pain of a special district fee or a tap fee or that kind of thing. Or a monthly operating fee for those who are connected. So there's a lot of variability on how you can fund a wastewater district. Was the local power authority, Mountain Parks, asked whether there is adequate electricity available for the system operations? Thank you.
No, we would need three-phase power. We typically don't get our electrical engineering team involved until 30% design. So that's the answer to that question.
What are the estimated monthly costs to the people connected to the system? I don't have a good answer for that because there are so many different ways you can fund a system. Do you have any info on how much a typical wastewater bill is? It's not very much. I'm trying to think what my wastewater bill is in the Keystone area. Do you have any sense of that?
DOLA has a great study on that showing average throughout the state, and I could provide a follow-up on that. I don't want to hazard the wrong number, but I can give you a reference on that.
Yeah.
I think the tricky part is the variability in funding
Yeah.
and the variability of how you service that debt. Even for the same treatment system, you could have monthly user rates that are wildly different for the same capital cost, depending on how it was just determined to be most effectively funded.
Were the report engineers aware of soil movement issues, Heeney slide zone, at the time of this report? Yeah, we definitely talked about that on site. Do we have 100% understanding of that? I would say no. I don't know if anybody does. But the discussions I recall where the wells are shearing at about 60-foot depth. We talked about whether there have been any water service lines that have been impacted by the shifting soils. We were told that none that we're aware of. And so that kind of told us that, there's not a lot of surface movement, at least in that downtown Heeney area. Certainly you all can cite where there is surface movement occurring. And so something that would need to be taken into consideration. But as far as just servicing that downtown Heeney area, it seems like there wouldn't be a lot of impact from that, but more study would need to be done on that. What will the long-term effect on the reservoir's water quality be? Going back to question number 1, where we haven't documented any water quality problems from the wastewater being generated, I can't assume that there would be any impact to the reservoir. Treatment technologies are really great to protect reservoirs or rivers. We have a very strict standard up at the Dillon Reservoir for phosphorus in particular. We've had that regulation for 40 years, I think. And we've been able to maintain the same water quality in terms of nutrients in Dillon Reservoir over that period of time, despite our population just booming. Because the treatment levels there are so robust. So
you discharge into the Dillon Reservoir?
Yeah, so we've got, all of Upper Blue Sanitation District discharge. I think they're the big, either Upper Blue is the biggest or the Dillon Silverthorne plant is the biggest. But all of Breckenridge Valley discharges into the reservoir there. That Snake River wastewater treatment plant is, Keystone, Summit Cove, which is, I think, the third most populated community in Summit County. There's a lot of people there. That discharges to the lake. Frisco discharges to the lake. And like Simon was referring to, it's preferable to discharge to a river because it mixes immediately, dilutes, right? And so they're more strict when you're discharging to a lake because you don't want to end up with this little pocket of phosphorus and nitrogen and that kind of thing.
That's the water supply from Denver.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the water quality in Dillon Reservoir is great.
But they won't let you swim in it.
Yeah, I think.
Dogs can pee and poop in it.
Yeah, I've heard that the main reason they don't want you to swim in it is the cold. But there has been a little bit of, it's our water, we don't want you swimming in it. But I think the messaging has changed on that a bit. But yeah, as you all know, there's been a lot of deaths in both reservoirs just because of the shock of the cold. Thank you. Will the sewage treatment plant have any odors that neighbors could smell?
I can cover that.
Thank you.
Wastewater treatment smells. So yes, there could potentially be an odor. There are ways to mitigate that. So typically you get odors from the anaerobic anoxic process, right, when there's not oxygen. The majority of this process would be aerobic. When you're adding oxygen to the wastewater, if you have a dissolved oxygen concentration above a milligram per liter, it does not have an odor. In the same way of what you may think of when you think of wastewater odors, that's typically coming from an anaerobic environment. There are ways to mitigate that. You could add odor control as part of this, which is very typical if you have close residents. And so that would be something that would be hashed out in design if you wanted to incur the cost for a robust odor control system or not.
Can you go back a few slides? I wanted to just go back to our over-exaggerated Snake River wastewater treatment plant, which serves the Keystone Summit Cove area. Do you remember what their daily flows are there by chance?
I don't. And then
Way more than Heeney's. And this doesn't show any of the homes here, unfortunately, but some of you have driven by. The home's just back right up to this treatment plant. It's townhomes right there. And you all know the prevailing winds are out of the northwest. And so it blows right up that Snake River inlet, goes across the wastewater plant into those people's backyards. And I asked Josh Johnson, he's the director, I said, how many complaints do you get on this? He's like, I haven't had any. And he's been there for, 3 years or something. And I've been with the county for 21 and a half years. I've never received a complaint there. And so, like Simon said, it's not like the olden days or even maybe even currently you drive by the Inglewood or Denver wastewater treatment plant. You're like, ooh, turn off the outside vent, right? Because you can smell it, but they can really control those odors well.
I was in that wastewater treatment plant in the heart of it this past December, and I lived to tell the tale.
Yeah, ate your lunch right there with the
Yeah, we
poop.
had lunch there, I remember, yeah.
Did you drink the water that came out?
I'm sure I have. I'm sure I have. It's pretty clean, you know? Well, on the after side, on the back end, not going in.
Yeah. Commissioner Nina, for the folks on the video, was just talking about visiting the Snake River plant, and so it's not that stinky. Let's see, question 21, where and how will the sludge be disposed at? Simon talked about that a little bit. No, Ryan talked about that a little bit with the biosolids. We compost them at the Summit County Scrap Resource Allocation Park. And some of them will go down to Denver, where they are land applied to farms sometimes. As you can imagine, there's a lot of rules around that, but further treatment elsewhere would occur. If a home sewer pipe is too low to drain by gravity into the gravity collection system, can the cost of the home's required sewage lift station be added to the overall cost of the sewage collection system? I guess that's a possibility, but I don't think that's typical. I think that cost is usually held by the individual homeowner. Do you have anything to add to that, Simon?
Yeah, that's correct. It's usually an E1 pumping system, a small PD pump, and that is usually a cost that's incurred by the homeowner for maintenance.
Yeah. What happens during a power outage? Good question. We've had power outages. We had one, y'all remember when there was a gas leak detected and they were doing the revolving blackouts that were only supposed to last for 2 hours. And some places, especially in the Upper Blue Sanitation District, went for, I think, 6 hours. It was the coldest day of that year, I remember. And I was on the phone with those guys as they're driving around their generator trucks to the lift stations to manually activate them and keep the water flowing. Typically at wastewater treatment plants, my understanding is they have generators, backup generators to keep up with that. Anything you've got to add?
Yeah, that's correct. This facility would have a backup, typically diesel generator with an automatic transfer switch that turns it on when you lose power.
But not the individual lift stations.
They can have them. You go either way with the lift stations. Critical lift stations typically have automatic transfer switch with a diesel generator. Less critical lift stations usually just have the district will have a generator that they can take around to different lift stations. So you have an option there.
Yeah, and with my example of Upper Blue, my understanding is that they had the ability to operate a lot of them without driving around with a generator, but some of them definitely needed to have that portable generator system. Can the pump stations handle feminine hygiene products and handy wipes? Are these the flushable wipes, maybe? Do y'all want to address that?
Please put that in the trash. Yeah, I mean, it's a headache for operators. You know, there's ways around it. I was at a lift station earlier in the week, and they have a mechanical screen just for the lift station because they see so much abuse of these flushable wipes, where it's more cost effective for them just to have a mechanical screen at a lift station. That's atypical. The pumps can be designed to convey larger solids and bring it to the plant so that it can be screened at the plant. But particularly with a tight community like this, the number one thing would be to avoid putting those down the drain because ultimately it'll increase your costs. The pumps will fail prematurely and you will have operational issues.
Yeah. So lift stations are a challenge, but they're very common. You would think in a mountain community, you wouldn't need lift stations as much, but in my experience, you need them more than out in the flatlands because you've got these undulations to get to the wastewater treatment plant. Why wasn't the treatment plant located below the dam on property gifted to the county by the federal government? I know we kind of talked about this a little bit during the JVA portion of the presentation. It costs a lot of money to lay pipe in the ground. And it doesn't seem very far when you drive down to go fishing, but it's a long ways to get down there. That was a consideration as well as pumping up to the river, up above the reservoir. Let's see, 26. Was a qualified contractor consulted on the estimated installed costs, and was the contractor aware of the field working conditions, small roads, difficult right-of-ways, land movement, etc.? Simon?
Yeah, I can cover that. The short answer is no. The long answer is that's definitely something you would want to do as part of the detailed design. For water, wastewater projects, the delivery, two common delivery methods are design build and construction manager at risk. We've been doing a lot of CMAR projects, construction manager at risk. So what you see there is you'll see your consultant take the design to just a 30% design level, and then we actually bid those documents to contractors. And the contractors provide their overhead and profit for the project, and then you can select a contractor based on their qualifications to perform that type of work, and then it's an open book process. So then at 30%, 60%, 90%, 100% design, you're getting real-time feedback from the contractor where they're saying things like, hey, it'd be a lot cheaper if I could put this crane on this side as opposed to this side. Oh, well, we can make that change. And then that real-time feedback avoids commonly what you see with traditional delivery methods. When you do design, bid, build, often you will find that when you bid that project, the bids come in higher than the engineer's estimate. And so it's a good way to control that so you don't get a surprise near the end of the project. And that's what we would propose for this, is either a design build or a CMAR.
So if you don't mind, I'll elaborate on that, Simon. What were the estimated costs based off of?
Yeah, so we did go out and get quotes from the different manufacturers, the package treatment system. And then also, we have internal databases where we're actively building these plants throughout the state of Colorado, so we have a pretty good feel for what these things are going to cost. Mm-hmm. So a combination of quotes and experience in the industry.
So that kind of wraps up the questions that we had pre-submitted before the meeting. Are there any questions that folks had beyond that? Maybe we'll start in the room before we go to Zoom.
So you guys mentioned that there's a 10-foot space between a water line and a sewer line. Mm-hmm. Is this a county requirement, Summit County?
I believe that's a state
or is that Colorado Health Department?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's an option if you do have to run them closer that you can encase. Let's say you've got a 4-inch line, you can encase it in a 6-inch line to go closer.
Because there's a lot of older water districts and sanitation districts that 10-inch or a 10-foot restriction was not in effect, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot out there that doesn't necessarily meet current code for sure. Any other questions in the room?
Yeah, I have one.
Mark?
So I understand trying to put your finger on a cost of anything is really difficult when you haven't even begun engineering, and there's so many variables and design options, and then the extent at which those designs would go. But as far as like putting your finger on a specific cost, I'm wondering if either Simon or Ryan or even Dan could speak to specifically like what a buy-in cost would be in Blue River, what those residents in Blue River paid to buy into that system, or any specific costs that you could cite that you know of.
Yeah, and I would start by saying, don't quote me on this, but we're filming it. But years ago, when they expanded into the Blue River area, I remember hearing 10, 10, 10 thrown out, $10,000 for district inclusion, $10,000 for a tap fee, but that's dependent on how many bedrooms, et cetera, and then $10,000 to construct the pipe, from the house to the main. But those quotes are very old, so likely have gone up significantly like everything else. Do you have anything to add?
2 districts that I was working with earlier this week, as far as what their tap fees were, a little different to like the district inclusion, but just a general reference for tap fees. It was unique to me because they were so different. One was $10,000 for a tap fee, and the other one was $24,000, and that's for a single wastewater tap for a single family equivalent.
Mm-hmm. Look, I'm just gonna say that this is expensive. We're not trying to sell something here that is, we're not trying to convince you that it's not expensive. I don't even know if I'm here to convince you that sewer is the right way to go. it's expensive. There's no doubt about that. It's a big consideration for the community to make. Mark, did you have a question?
If you could just
Repeat it.
What's the approximate cost of engineering for this system? This is a P&A. What it costs to engineer this system?
I can tell you because we put it right in the report. Give me a second.
So the question was, what would the cost for basically the next phase of design look like? The actual design, the engineering of the system, and Simon is looking some of this up.
Yeah, so in our opinion, a probable cost, we put engineering, permitting, and design at 12% of the project subtotal at $1.2 million.
Cheap.
I have a question.
Yeah, you want me? I'll just repeat it.
Okay. So you, starting at the very beginning, you said, people have been asking you about hooking into a sewer system out here. I was wondering where those people were coming from and how you talked the county commissioners into $25,000 on this.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how to answer the question of where those people are coming from, but it's a common question that we get because that's the first question
So
that.
how many common, I mean, is this monthly? Have you had 6 people a year asking the question? It just seemed like
Yeah.
pretty expensive for a few questions.
Yeah, so it's not like, I think you said 6 people. So the question is, who is asking the question of whether sewer is available when their septic system fails to justify the expense of $25,000, right? Is that a pretty good summary?
Report for this study.
Right,
That's what
right.
I'm wondering, how come you guys are spending this money?
Yeah, yeah. I can't say how many people have asked that question. I haven't documented that. But we only have 2 to 3 failures a year that I talked about on average. I've been here for 21, 22 years. So over the course of those years, we do get that question quite often. And it's a fair question because that's the first question. Is sewer available? Because I can't permit a septic system if sewer is available. So the homeowners naturally ask that question first. But we definitely have had quite a few folks, I don't have a number, who want to expand their property, and we can barely issue them a septic permit for the number of bedrooms, the size that they currently have, you know. And so how did we justify that cost? I guess we've got 3 homes right now that are unoccupied in Summit County, or in the Heeney area because of failing septic systems. The county hasn't denied them permits to replace those. They've just run into the big price tag, have done initial consultations with engineers to replace the system, and they've stalled out. That's really difficult when we're in a housing crisis in Summit County as well. And so it's difficult for us to informally condemn properties, even though we haven't condemned any of these properties. They've kind of just decided to self-condemn their own properties and not replace their systems because of the cost associated with that. And so on one level, we're trying to build, county housing. On another level, we've got houses that can't be occupied. And so we just want to explore all possible solutions there. And, Heeney is a bedroom community for Summit County. And so I think that's a reasonable option for us to explore. As far as how much cost, I don't know how to answer that question.
Well, it's just, you talk the county commissioners out of this money,
Mm-hmm.
and then you got a grant.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems like that money could have gone to some other things.
Yep.
Like roads,
Yep.
clean water.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a significant amount of the budget does go to roads and bridges, far more than goes to... What's that?
Not here.
Yeah, I'm gonna quit talking because I don't know about that piece, but it's I don't know if Commissioner Nina wants to talk to that, but there's a lot of considerations when balancing a budget, and this was one of them.
Well,
Yeah.
to me, this is putting the cart before the horse.
Mm-hmm.
Heeney has other issues that need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and like I said earlier, you look at our ages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we try to look, decades into the future. My guess is eventually sewer's going to come to Heeney, just like it has to many other small communities in the state. The question is just when, and this is the first phase. Again, I don't want to try to make it sound like we're pushing for this. This was just us kind of exploring those questions of what would it take. If the analysis would have come back to say it's going to cost $3 million, and that's a cost of $20,000 per parcel, this would have been a pretty easy question. Let's get sewer here, right? But it looks like a little more expensive than the average septic system would be. So it's not an easy question to answer, but at least we're further along in answering that question with some of this info. So.
And then in addition, I guess there's one more piece of information that I think is important for you all to be aware of in regards to this whole water conversation. And that is that today I just penned a letter to our federal delegation, our senators and our House members, around the state revolving fund for water and water quality projects. Some of you may or may not know, but the federal budget that's being proposed in 2026 will cut that fund from about $2.7 billion to only $305 million, and that's for all 50 states. And so it's basically a reduction of about 90%. And so what does that mean for you guys? If you were to decide, and I have no interest in being a part of the internal conversation that you guys are going to have amongst yourselves, because I also am aware that some residents have made that major investment, so they are nowhere near a need for a sewer system versus some who are on the verge of it being a reality. But what this means is that money for those state revolving loan funds is going to be far much more competitive. And so I'm trying to do my part in protecting those funds, because I think that, wherever there's a need for water, like improved water quality, that's something that's important for residents, because without clean water, you can't live and thrive. And so that's something that you guys should also be aware of. And if you feel strongly enough, you can feel free to call your senators as well. And then I guess I'll talk about the roads. I mean, I wasn't part of I can't really speak to how this was a convince of the board, because I wasn't on the board when they approved this study. So, and I don't know when that decision was made, but know that this board has made the largest investment in roads in Summit County's history of $11 million. And we're still trying to figure out how we're gonna continue to do that at a pace that doesn't necessarily bankrupt the county. And we're really trying to evaluate and make some really hard decisions when it comes to the budget in forms of cuts in certain ways in certain departments in certain forms. And so that's a hard decision to have to make, but we know that the quintessential responsibility of county boards of county commissioners is to maintain the roads, in addition to a large slew of other things that the state also requires us to do. So we're trying to manage all of that, know that this is something that is important to the board. We are doing we're trying to figure out where Heeney fits into that. But again, we also have to take into account what are gonna be the most used roads and what are the areas, like those connectors, that need to be addressed at a sooner rate than maybe some that aren't as well used. I know that doesn't feel good. It doesn't even feel good for me to say that, but I would hate to just walk away and be like, oh, well, she didn't even address it. I feel like that's a disservice to all of you. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the county commissioners and DOLA for putting up the money to do this study and all your hard work, Dan. And, you know, there may be some people that object to spending the money, but, you know, you can't look at just today and tomorrow. You gotta be looking 50 years down the road. We're not gonna be here. Other people are gonna be moving into this community. They're gonna be expanding the houses. You know, eventually, like Dan says, the community is gonna need a sewer system. So I think it's very worthwhile that we've got the conversation started and we got some numbers to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. How about we go to Zoom? Are there any questions on the Zoom?
Not at the moment. I put a message in the chat asking for people to put them in there, but nothing yet.
Okay. I'll repeat it.
Okay. Is there going to be any problem with permitting for projects that we want to do here in Heeney or in the area around this if we don't do something about sewer, or is there some way to enforce getting some of these properties that don't have good septic systems to get them on the road to getting a system that works?
So the question is whether if we choose not to do sewer, will there be challenges with permitting other projects? And what I hear is on-site wastewater systems. Yes. I mean, that's partly why we're here. It is a big challenge to permit some of the smaller lots that are on on-site wastewater treatment systems. In my time here, we've never denied. That's not completely true. We denied one application for a variance for a septic system. It was up in Montezuma many years ago. And the previous owner of the property had a septic system designed for a reasonable 1,700 square foot home or something like that. Maybe it was even smaller than that, I forget. A new owner came in and, you know, took the maybe 1,200 footprint house, this was many years ago, bumped it out to a 3,000 square footprint house, which pushed the septic system down to the Snake River, and then they needed a variance in order to build this house. And the Board of Health back then denied it because they could build a modest home, and so they kind of pushed them back to that original design. So my point is that people have options, they just get to be expensive options. The county definitely, if the technology's there, we want to permit people to continue to use their homes, to build their homes if it's an undeveloped parcel. And so we will work with people and we'll overcome those challenges, but there will be challenges. Last chance. Well, last chance tonight. You can call me tomorrow. And I'll call these guys. Well, again, thank you everybody for showing up. I know you're busy and it's a beautiful evening after the 3 rainstorms today. So I appreciate you coming down and hearing about this important topic. And reach out if you have any thoughts or ideas, and I'll be curious to see where you guys go with this in the years to come.
This recording will be online, correct?
Correct. Our plan is to put it on YouTube. I don't think it'll go viral. And so then we'll put a link on our website to it. Yep. So.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you those on Zoom.